Welcome to the Meeting of Minds podcast. I'm Philippa. I'm going to talk today about a couple of things that I hear a lot of people talking about, and I just want to sort of give my take on them and how they show up for me, because I think, these things can show up very differently for all of us. And I thought, just going to twist it around, just thought it would be useful to talk about them. And those two things are imposter syndrome and the inner critic. And, those two things, certainly the inner critic, gosh, my inner critic voice has been very loud for years. So much so that I didn't even realize it was like you could not have an inner critic. It wasn't possible. Everybody had this sort of quite mean, hostile, critical voice in their head all the time, because that had very much been my experience. Imposter syndrome, now that's an interesting one. I had never heard of imposter syndrome, seriously, until, I don't know, say about 10 years ago. I remember I was out for dinner with a couple of friends of mine. One of them was saying, "Oh, I really have imposter syndrome." And I was like, "Oh, okay, what's that?" And the other friend was saying, "Yeah, I have that too." And I just didn't know what they were talking about. And when the first friend who'd mentioned it talked about it, she said it's that feeling at work. So a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome around work, and that's where she was feeling it. And she was saying, "I feel like I am going to be caught out one day, that at my job they're going to realise that I'm not very good at it." And that was really interesting, because not feeling good enough and feeling like I wanted to hide the real me was definitely something I was really used to. But the idea that it had a name called imposter syndrome, and that it only perhaps showed up at work, which was my understanding of it then, I hadn't really come across. And actually at work, I used to be a lawyer. I was a lawyer for quite a long time. And at work, the actual doing the work, I was commercial. I did a lot of commercial property work, and working through the transactions and negotiating contracts and things, and working with the clients and taking instructions. I knew I could do that, and I knew I was good at it. I suppose I didn't always feel good at it, but I did know really that on the whole I was good at it, and I felt quite safe in that environment, safe in the knowledge that actually I knew what I was doing there. So when all other parts of my life were not going well, I could feel quite safe at work. So I didn't really understand the whole imposter syndrome, because I'd never heard of it. But once I heard of it, it's, the power of suggestion, isn't it? Once I'd heard about it, I kept being aware of this voice in my head that told me I wasn't good enough. And I wondered whether that was imposter syndrome. And frankly, it didn't matter what name it had. It didn't matter at all. It was just what was, what was going on, and how I felt and how I coped with these things. And I do really like to understand things. And I did a lot of looking into imposter syndrome, and I know a lot of people talk about it, and I know I'm talking about it here today, but on the whole, I don't talk about it because I don't find it helpful. I don't find it helpful for me. I don't find it a helpful thing to label, because I don't think it aids understanding, and I don't think it can help growth and healing. That's just my personal opinion. I feel that imposter syndrome comes from fear. And I think it's much healthier for growth and for healing to name it as fear rather than a syndrome. And I think for me, imposter syndrome, using that as a phrase, suggests somehow that I know that there's something deliberate in what I am doing, in covering up some sort of lack or incompetency or fear, I suppose. And, you know, I suppose now I'm saying this, there is something deliberate about that, but it's not isolated to this one thing that is going to be labelled imposter syndrome. I mean, for me, it applied to the whole of my life. And I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, about perfectionism, because I'm going to be a guest on her podcast. And she was saying to me, where does perfectionism show up in your life? And for me, it's inherent in me. It was. I'm a recovering perfectionist now. I am in recovery. It was kind of my addiction. So that's why I talk about it in like, you know, use the words recovery. But I was saying it showed up everywhere. And in all elements of my life, in my personal relationships, in my romantic relationships, at work, with friends, in all aspects of my life. And the same really goes for fear. And I didn't find labeling one aspect of fear, and I wasn't really which bit to label imposter syndrome, and I didn't find that particularly helpful. Now, you might find it helpful, and especially if it's only showing it in one area of your life, you might find it helpful. But I wanted to talk generally today about what I believe to be the correlation between imposter syndrome and inner critic, and how healing work can really help those things. Okay, so that's my long-winded explanation of what I'm going to talk about. So my inner critic was very loud, very mean, very nasty. It's the voice that would tell me that I couldn't. So when I went to Australia in my early 20s, it was my inner critic that told me I couldn't possibly climb the Sydney Harbour Bridge because there's probably not a pair of overalls that would fit me to do that climb, and everybody would laugh at me. So it was the inner critic that stopped me doing that. It didn't stop me doing anything else on the trip, actually, but it did stop me doing that. It's my inner critic that tells me I shouldn't be sitting here on video talking to you wearing a vest top. My arms are too fat. I'm too fat generally. I shouldn't be sitting here talking to you like this. It's the inner critic that would have stopped me doing this in the past. It's my inner critic that absolutely is screaming so loudly when I go swimming in our local marine lake wearing a bikini. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how loud my inner critic would be shouting, would like to shout, is trying to shout and tell me, you cannot do that. Someone your size cannot be wearing a bikini, cannot be in public wearing a bikini. It's interesting, isn't it? And it's that voice that has stopped me doing things where I have had to cope with other people's potential opinions of my body in the past. It's that voice that has stopped me doing them. And the voice that I hear in my head is partly mine and partly my mother's. I grew up very definitely feeling that my body, the shape of my body, the size of my body was not acceptable. My mum put me on my first diet at 7 to fit into a bridesmaid's dress. And it has been with me ever since, because she had issues with her body and was constantly on a diet and had all manner of ways of controlling that, that went on behind closed doors. And I'm not absolutely sure what they were, but I can have a very good guess. And I picked up that one has to do whatever it takes to look acceptable. And it didn't drive me down the same road as my mum. What it did was I turned to food for comfort to fill the hole that was left by that feeling of not being acceptable. And it drove me into bigger clothes, and clothes that were far too big for me to hide, because I needed to hide my body. It was really important that nobody saw it, because it was unacceptable. It was ugly. It was horrible. And those messages didn't just come from my mum, they come from society in general. They come from other people that can't keep their opinions to themselves. And I would always hear fat cow a lot. Look how fat she is. And, looking back, I was never even really that fat. Not that that matters. I am fat, and that's okay. It's just a word. It's just a description. I'm not skinny. I'm not thin. I'm fat. That is okay. The least interesting thing about me is the size of my body. It really is. And what I have learned now is not to be ashamed of my body, because, around all these body issues is shame for me, absolute shame. And the inner critic, by being mean and horrible to me and telling me I am unacceptable, I cannot go out in a bikini, I cannot wear a vest top, I cannot be on video doing all these things, is actually trying to protect me. My inner critic is protecting me. Because my experience of the world is that I feel shame, I feel upset, I feel sad, I feel angry sometimes when I feel that people are laughing at me, being unkind to me about the way I look. So if my inner critic makes me behave in a way that means I cover up, then I won't get those horrible comments and those snidey remarks and being laughed at. So it's actually a protective part of me. That inner critic is trying to protect me. It took me a long time to realize that. And I believe that imposter syndrome is how it describes behavior and feelings that come from our inner critic. So our inner critic is aware, our past experiences tell us when people might not be very nice to us, when we might be laughed at, when we might be ridiculed. And the voice in our head, which sometimes we call our inner critic, we can call it all manner of things. Some people give it a name so as not to call it the inner critic. But those voices, those noises in our head that tell us not to do this, are trying to protect us based on past experiences. And that comes from a place of fear of that ridicule, fear of what people are going to say and do and laugh and all those things. And for me, imposter syndrome is very much a part of that. It's a result of those past experiences, that fear, the voices in our head, and it then becomes something that gets rolled together and called a syndrome, which makes it sound like it's almost like medicalizing something. because syndromes are normally things that we talk about in the medical sphere, and it's almost like we're putting a medicalized type term on something that actually, when we look at the feelings and the reason behind it, is totally understandable. That's why I don't think imposter syndrome is helpful. But I'm not saying it's wrong, because, you know, I can't tell anybody whether it's wrong to call anything whatever they want to call it. I'm just explaining what I think. But I want you to know that the inner critic, that mean voice in our head, is actually trying to protect us. And the work to do is to try and understand what it's trying to protect us from. And when we get to that point, we can really start to work on with it. We can work with it in a way that we can have an inner dialogue with ourselves, so that that part of us that is trying to protect us can learn to understand that actually we're okay. We don't need protecting anymore, because often we've learned ways to protect ourselves in our younger years, and we bring it to our adulthood. And even though perhaps we still don't need that pattern of behavior or that way of being, we're still doing it because it's habit, it's because it's what we know. But if we can see that that is what we are doing, but it is no longer helpful, then that's when change starts. And, you know, I have a long journey with my feelings around my body, and I'll talk about that more in other episodes perhaps. But realizing that actually being mean to myself just made me eat more. Being mean to myself kept me in that place of feeling less than and unworthy. And actually realizing that there is so much more to me than the size of my body. It's actually the least interesting thing about me, like I said before. And realizing that and accepting that has been a great freedom for me. It's that freedom that has allowed me to go in the marine lake wearing a bikini and really not feeling shame. It's that freedom that allows me to sit here and looking at myself as I'm recording this in this vest top and really going, and it's fine. There was a little moment that I caught myself going, shall I change my t-shirt? Shall I change my top? And I thought, no, I'm not going to, because this is what I'm recording about. So I'm absolutely not going to change it. And I hope you can hear the joy in my voice, the joy in me that allows me now to sit here and say this. I'm really mean it, because I do really mean it. You know, there are days, of course, there are still days where I might want to cover up a bit more. There are days when I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable about something, and it's not usually about my body, it's about something else, but the way it will show up is making me want to be a bit, cover up a little bit, hide a little bit, be a bit less visible. You know, and I record these videos on days when I'm feeling quite good, because that's the energy I want to bring. And maybe one day I will show up when I'm really not feeling great. But maybe that's a whole other place for me to get to. I mean, I did record the episode on teenagers. I think that was episode 69, 68, 69. And I recorded that when I was really activated by something. And that was me not necessarily showing up at the beginning in my best way. But by the end, I'd worked my way through it. So, you know, please don't think I am like this all the time. I'm like this a lot of the time. I have become like this a lot of the time because of the freedom I have found by accepting who I am, and by learning to work with the parts of me that I have always thought are mean and horrible, and understanding that they're trying to protect me. And by connecting with those parts and having an internal dialogue with them about it's okay. It's okay. There's nobody going to be mean to me now about my body. My mother's not around anymore. And if there are people who have an opinion and who think I shouldn't be, say, going in the lake wearing a bikini, then that is really down to them. It's not my problem. I'm quite happy in a bikini. If they don't like the look of it, don't look. Simple. But it's really down to them. If they have a problem with it, that is whatever, and that comes from wherever it comes in them. But it's not my problem. And, you know, I bought the bikini, I don't know, 2 years ago in a fit of, oh, I'm going to buy a bikini. And I've only ever worn it with my family. But this year I decided to go out in public wearing it. And it's not really about wearing the bikini, but it's owning the next step for me. And the next step of loving me, who I am, what I look like, and just being really kind to myself. And it's not hard to be kind to myself now. You know, I like me. I like being me. I like being this true version of me. And that's really why I do what I'm doing and bringing this podcast and the other work that I do, because I have found this new joy, this acceptance and freedom to be myself. And I just want this for as many people as I can bring it to. And if, you know, just one person listens to this and decides to go and wear the bikini, amazing. And if that's you, please tell me, please let me know. You know, or wear the shorts or wear the vest when it's warm. Don't care about what other people think. And I know that's easier said than done, but actually it is the voice in our head that's trying to protect us based on past experiences that is keeping us not wearing what we want to wear, not being who we truly are, not following the path that we want to follow. And, you know, we have one gorgeous, beautiful life in this body now. You know, I just want it to be as rich and fulfilling and amazing for you as it possibly can be. And that is incremental. You know, we can reach there bit by bit. It's not from here to all the way over here in one big step. And I talked about that in my episode about taking little steps. And, you know, if this is where I started in 2017 when I lost the sight in my eye, and, you know, I don't know, somewhere over here might be, I was going to say the end of the path, but there is no end of the path. But over here somewhere is where I'm aiming. I'm just moving in that direction bit by bit. And gradually I'm getting there. And it's not about getting there in one big go, because actually once we start on this journey, we're never done. There's always something else to unpack, something else to realize, something else to work on. But once you've done that big bit of work at the beginning, it does get easier. And I'm a bit of a nerd about it now anyway, and I really love it, as you can tell, because I'm here talking about it. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. And it's mainly about understanding that voice in our head is actually trying to protect us. And if we can work out what it's trying to protect us from, we can then start working with that inner critic, with that voice, to actually quieten it. And mine is really quite quiet now. And I didn't know that's what I was working towards. I just knew I was doing the work. And I realized in time, it was actually last September 2021, when I crawled around the Bristol 10K, and I realized that the voice in my head was saying, go on, you can do this. Just get to the next lamppost. You're doing really well. At least you're here doing it. That is what the voice in my head was saying, rather than, you silly old fat cow. What do you think you're doing running this? There's no way you were going to be able to run this. That just wasn't there. And that joy in that moment of realizing that the voice was actually encouraging was like, wow, And I didn't realize until that moment that that is what had happened to that voice in my head. It does get a bit louder sometimes, and often that's now my warning sign that I am doing a bit too much. I'm a bit tired, getting a bit overwhelmed. And when that voice gets louder, that's my indication now just to back off a little bit and work out what's going on. So it's kind of my early warning system now. So it's still really helpful. So yeah, just to know that, because we have all sorts of parts in us, and I'll talk about that. I have talked about that in previous episodes, and maybe it's time to talk about it again. There are all different parts of us. A lot of people talk about parts. It comes from internal family systems, but I didn't learn really about internal family systems. I just learned that there were parts of me doing different jobs, and I've worked those out over the years with the help of therapy and the work I've done since I left therapy. But they're all part of us, and they're all part of me. And by embracing them and bringing them, they were all a bit scattered and felt a bit pushed out and ignored. And by actually embracing them and listening to what they've got to say and kind of bringing them all back to me, I've become whole. And, I appreciate that might be a little bit woo for some people, but if that means anything to you, then hopefully, you'll know what I mean. Okay, so that's today's episode. I really enjoyed talking about this today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Please get in touch. I'd really love to start building a bit more of a community here. That's my aim. And please get in touch and let me know what you've been listening to, and just drop me a note and let me know what you've resonated with, what you found useful. Maybe what you'd like me to talk more about. Maybe there's something I haven't touched on yet that you'd like me to talk about. Or just drop a note and say, hi, I've been listening. I like it. I mean, tell me you don't like it if you want. Whatever. Just get in touch. I did have a message the other day, actually, from somebody saying, just want to let you know I've been listening and I'm really enjoying it. And that's marvellous. I love it. So thank you for getting in touch. And if you haven't got in touch with me yet, go on, do it. Thank you. Have a great week, and I'll be back here again soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Meeting of Minds podcast. You can find this podcast in all the usual places. Please tell your friends. Please subscribe. And if you have a moment, I'd be really grateful if you could rate and review, as it helps other people find us and helps me spread the messages of empowerment and positivity that I'm really passionate about. If you want to find out more about me, you can visit my website, www.safeandsupported.co.uk. Until next time, bye.